8, Chicago, Illinois. When Brendan Cronin went to work as an orderly at St. Joseph's Hospital for Children, only Dr. Jim McMurtry knew that he was really a priest. Father Wyckowick had obtained a guarantee of secrecy from the physician, as well as a solemn assurance that Brendan would be assigned as much work and as much unpleasant work as any orderly. Therefore, during his first day on the job, he emptied bedpans, changed urine-soaked bed linens, assisted a therapist with passive exercises for bedridden patients, spoon-fed an 8-year-old boy who was partially paralyzed, pushed wheelchairs, encouraged despondent patients, cleaned up the vomit of 2 young cancer victims nauseous from chemotherapy. No one pampered him, and no one called him father. The nurses, doctors, orderlies, candy strippers, and patients called him Brendan, and he felt uncomfortable, like an imposter engaged in a masquerade. That first day, overcome with pity and grief for St. Joseph's Children, he twice slipped away to the staff men's room and locked himself in a stall where he sat and wept. The twisted legs and swollen joints of those who suffered from rheumatoid arthritis, that mangler of the innocent young, was a sight almost too terrible to be borne. The wasted flesh of the muscular dystrophy victims, the suppurating wounds of the burn victims, the battered bodies of those whose parents had abused them. He wept for all of them. He could not imagine why Father Wyckowick thought this duty would help him regain his lost faith. If anything, the existence of so many pain-racked children only reinforced his doubt. If the merciful God of Catholicism really existed, if there was a Jesus, why would he allow the innocent to endure such atrocities? Of course, Brendan knew all the standard theological arguments on that point. Mankind had brought all forms of evil upon itself by choice, the Church said, by turning away from the grace of God. But theological arguments were inadequate when he came face to face with these smallest victims of fate. By the second day, the staff was still calling him Brendan, but the children were calling him Pudge, a long-unused nickname which he divulged to them in the course of telling a funny story. They liked his stories, jokes, rhymes, and silly puns, and he found he could nearly always get a laugh or at least a smile out of them. That day he went to the men's room and wept only once. By the third day, both the children and staff called him Pudge. If he had another métier, M-E-T-I-E-R, besides the priesthood, he had found it at St. Joseph's. In addition to performing the usual tasks expected of an orderly, he entertained the patients with comic patter, teased them, drew them out. Wherever he went, he was greeted with cries of "Pudge!" that were a better reward than money. And he did not cry until he was back in the hotel room that he had taken for the duration of Father Wyckowick's unconventional therapy. By Wednesday afternoon, the 7th day, he knew why Father Wyckowick sent him to St. Joseph's. Understanding came while he was brushing the hair of a 10-year-old girl who'd been crippled by a rare bone disease. Her name was Emmeline, and she was rightfully proud of her hair. It was thick, glossy, raven black, and its healthy luster seemed to be a defiant response to the sickness that had wasted her body. She liked to brush her hair 100 strokes every day, but often her knuckles and wrist joints were so inflamed that she could not hold the brush. On Wednesday, Brendan put her in a wheelchair and took her to the X-ray department, where they were monitoring a new drug's effects on her bone marrow. And when he brought her back to her room an hour later, he brushed her hair for her. Emmeline sat in the wheelchair looking out a window, while Brendan pulled the soft bristles through her silken tresses, and she became enchanted with the winterscape beyond the glass. With a gnarled hand more suited to the body of an 80-year-old woman, she pointed down to the roof of another lower wing of the hospital. "See that patch of snow, Pudge?" Rising heat within the building had caused most of the snow to loosen and slide off the pitched roof, but a large patch remained, outlined by dark slate shingles. "It looks like a ship," Emmy said. "The shape, you see? a beautiful old ship with 3 white sails, gliding across a slate-colored sea. For a while, Brendan could not see what she saw, but she continued to describe the imaginary vessel, and the 4th time that he looked up from her hair, he suddenly was able to see that the patch of snow did indeed bear a remarkable and delightful resemblance to a sailing ship. To Brendan, the long icicles that hung in front of Emmy's window were transparent bars, the hospital a prison from which she might never be released. But to Emmy, those frozen stalactites were wondrous Christmas decorations that, she said, put her in the holiday mood. God likes winter as much as he likes spring, Emmy said. The gift of the seasons is one of his ways of keeping us from getting bored with the world. That's what Sister Catherine told us, and right away I could see it must be true. When the sun hits those icicles just right, they cast rainbows across my bed. Ever so pretty rainbows, Pudge. The ice and snow are like jewels, and ermine cloaks that God uses to dress up the world in winter to make us ooh and ah. That's why he never makes 2 snowflakes alike. It's a way of reminding us that the world he made for us is a wonderful, wonderful world. As if on cue, snowflakes spiraled down from the gray December sky. In spite of her nearly useless legs and twisted hands, in spite of the pain she had endured, Emmy believed in God's goodness and in the inspiring rightness of the world that he had created. Strong faith was, in fact, a trait of nearly all the children in St. Joseph's Hospital. They remained convinced that a caring Father watched over them from his kingdom in the sky, and they were encouraged. In his mind he could hear Father Wyckoff saying, "If these innocents can suffer so much and not lose their faith, what sorry excuse do you have, Brendan? Perhaps in their very innocence and naivety, they know something that you have forgotten while chasing your sophisticated education in Rome. Perhaps there's something to be learned from this, Brendan. Do you think so? Just maybe, something to be learned?" But the lesson was not powerful enough to restore Brendan's faith. He continued to be deeply moved, not by the possibility that a caring and compassionate God might actually exist, but by the children's amazing courage in the face of such adversity. He gave Emmy's hair 100 strokes, then 10 more, which pleased her, and then he lifted her from the wheelchair and put her into bed. As he pulled the covers over her pathetic bent stick legs, he felt a surge of that same rage that had filled him during Mass at St. Bet's 2 Sundays ago, and if a sacred chalice had been close at hand, he would not have hesitated to hurl it at the wall once more. Emmy gasped, and Brendan had the odd notion that she had read his blasphemous thoughts, but she said, "Oh, Pudge, did you hurt yourself?" He blinked at her. "What do you mean?" "Did you burn yourself? Your hands. When did you hurt your hands?" Bewildered by her questions, he looked down at the backs of his hands, turned them over, and was surprised by the marks on his palms. In the center of each palm was a red ring of inflamed and swollen flesh. Each ring was 2 inches in diameter and sharply defined along all its edges. The circular band of irritated tissue which formed the ring was no more than half an inch wide, inscribing a perfect circle. The skin around and within the circle was quite normal. It almost looked as if the marks had been painted on his hands. But when he touched one of the rings with the fingertip, he could feel the bump it made in his palm. "That's strange," she said. Dr. Stan Heaton was the resident physician on duty in St. Joseph's emergency room. Standing at the examining table on which Brendan sat, peering with interest at the odd rings on Brendan's hands, he said, "Do they hurt?" "No, not at all." "Itching? A burning sensation?" "No, neither." "Do they at least tingle?" "No." "You've never had these before?" "Never." "Do you have any allergies that you're aware of?" "No." At first glance it looks like a mild burn, but you'd have remembered leaning against something hot enough to cause this. There'd be pain. So we can rule that out. Same for acid contact. Did you say you'd taken a little girl to radiology? Yes, but I didn't stay in the room while the x-rays were taken. Doesn't really look like a radiation burn. Maybe dermatomycosis, a fungal infection, perhaps in the ringworm family, though the symptoms aren't sufficiently indicative of ringworm. No scaling, no itching, and the ring is much too clearly defined. Not like the inflammation patterns you get with the microsporum or trichophyton infection. So what does all this boil down to? Heaton hesitated, then said, I don't think it's anything serious. The best guess is a rash related to an unidentified allergy. If the problem persists, you'll have to take the standard patch test and find the source of your problem. He let go of Brendan's hands, went to a chair at a corner desk, and began to fill out a prescription form. Puzzled, Brendan stared at his hands a moment longer, then folded them in his lap. At the corner desk, still writing, Heaton said, I'll start with the simplest treatment, a cortisone lotion. If the rash doesn't disappear in a couple of days, come see me again. He returned to the examining table, holding out the prescription form. Brendan took the paper from him. Listen, is there any chance I might pass on an infection to the kids or anything like that? Oh, no, if I thought there was the slightest chance I'd have told you, Heaton said. Now let me have one last look. Brendan turned his hands palms up for examination. What the devil? Dr. Heaton said, surprised. The rings were gone. That night, in his room at the Holiday Inn, Brendan again endured the by now familiar nightmare about which he had spoken with Father Wygazik. It had disturbed his sleep twice before in the past week. He dreamed he was lying in a strange place, with his arms and legs restrained by straps or braces. From out of a haze, a pair of hands reached for him, hands encased in shiny black gloves. He woke in knots of sweat-soaked sheets, sat up in bed, and leaned back against the headboard, letting the dream evaporate as sweat dried on his forehead. In the dark, he brought his hands to his face to blot it, and went rigid when his palms touched his cheeks. He switched on the lamp. The swollen and inflamed rings had returned to his palms, but as he watched, they faded. It was Thursday, December 12th.